My name is Allison, and I'm 31 years old. I didn't grow up thinking I would one day sit at a family reunion and be reduced to a punchline, but when I look back now, I realize the role had been written for me a long time ago, and everyone else seemed to know their lines better than I did. The thing about my family is that they never outright said I didn't belong. They didn't have to. They did it in jokes, in glances, in the way conversations stopped when I tried to speak about my own life. I was always there, always paying, always fixing, but somehow never included. Over the years, I became what they relied on without ever respecting. The silent wallet, the safety net they pretended didn't exist until they needed it again. By the time the reunion came around, I already knew how it would go. Same backyard, same folding tables, same potato salad recipe I brought every year because it was expected of me, not because anyone appreciated it. I showed up anyway, because I still believe that effort might eventually be rewarded, that consistency might turn into belonging. I was wrong. We were barely halfway through dinner when my sister laughed, loud and sharp, the kind of laugh meant to draw attention. She didn't even look at me at first. "I can't believe you still show up after all we've said," she said, finally turning in her chair like she was addressing an audience. No one gasped. No one defended me. A few people smiled awkwardly, waiting to see how I'd react. My mom raised her glass, not in a toast, just enough to make her words feel official. "She's useful," she said, her tone casual. "Not included." It landed harder than shouting ever could have. This wasn't anger. This was agreement. Around the table, heads nodded. Someone snorted into their drink. An uncle chimed in, calling me the golden ticket, the silent wallet. They laughed like this was a shared truth, like I wasn't sitting right there hearing every word. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled, took a bite of the potato salad they always mocked, but never stopped eating, and said quietly, "Let me know how golden it feels in 5 minutes." No one paid attention. They never did when I wasn't paying for something. I pulled out my phone. What they didn't understand was that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just clicks a button. I froze the shared credit cards first. All of them. Gas, groceries, prescriptions. Then I opened the utility portals, water, electricity, internet, garbage, insurance, all set to auto-pay from my accounts, because it had always been easier that way. I revoked every single one. Then I moved to the subscriptions. Streaming services, music, family plans, every device but mine logged out in seconds. The shift in the air was almost physical. The lights flickered. Someone complained about the Wi-Fi. A phone disconnected mid-video. Confusion spread across faces that had just been laughing. My mom stood up, fear creeping into her voice as she asked what I thought I was doing. I didn't answer. I leaned back, finished my drink, and waited. By dessert, the screaming had started. By the time the brownies came out and the paper plates started making their second round across the table, the mood had changed so completely it felt like the yard itself had shifted. A few minutes earlier, they had been laughing like they were invincible, like the rules of our family were permanent, and I was just a fixture, a chair that happened to pay bills. Now the laughter was gone, replaced with frantic tapping on phone screens, and people looking around as if the solution might be hiding behind the cooler of sodas. It started small. Someone complained the Wi-Fi was acting up. Then one of my cousins muttered that his video froze and wouldn't load again. My sister rolled her eyes and said the internet always sucked at reunions. But then my mom's phone chimed, and the expression on her face changed from annoyance to confusion. She refreshed whatever app she was staring at, once, twice, then looked up like she was expecting someone else to explain what she was seeing. A low thud came from the AC unit, followed by a metallic whine that sounded like something giving up. The kitchen lights blinked in that ominous way they do right before they go out for good. My uncle's jaw tightened as he lifted his phone, held it up like he could catch a signal by force. My sister snapped at my dad, asking if he paid the electric bill this month. My dad's face went flat and uncomprehending, the way it always did when he was confronted with anything he didn't want to deal with. They started accusing each other first. That was the predictable part. My aunt blamed my uncle for forgetting to transfer money. My cousin blamed the internet provider. My mom blamed my dad for not calling the utility company when the last reminder came in. Everyone spoke at once, voices overlapping. The old familiar chaos of people who never planned because they assumed someone else would fix it. Then, like a wave, their eyes turned toward me. It wasn't even dramatic. It was instinct, the same reflex they'd had for years, the same silent agreement that if anything broke, I was the one who would patch it. My sister was the first to speak, voice sharp, already blaming. "What did you do?" she demanded, like I was a child who'd spilled juice on the carpet. My mom didn't sound angry. She sounded scared, which was almost worse. "Allison," she said slowly, like she was trying not to trigger me, "this isn't funny." I didn't move. I didn't even look around. I just watched them cycle through the stages I'd seen 1,000 times. Denial to confusion, to panic, to rage. The fridge beeped loudly with a power fault, the kind of relentless beep designed to make you act. My mom's pharmacy app popped up a notice about a failed prescription renewal. My sister's banking app wouldn't load, and she swore under her breath, like the universe had personally insulted her. My dad's truck key fob didn't unlock the doors on the first click, and I watched him press it again and again, like repetition might fix consequences. "This isn't what family does," my uncle snapped, voice rising. "This is petty, vindictive." My sister leaned forward, eyes flashing. "You're not God," she said, like that was supposed to put me in my place. I finally spoke, still calm, still almost gentle. "Then maybe stop praying to me every month." The table went quiet for a second, the kind of quiet where people realize they might have pushed too far but don't know how to back up without losing face. My uncle recovered first, puffing up with performative authority. He said he'd call the police if I didn't fix it. He pointed at me like I was committing a crime instead of reclaiming control. I didn't flinch. "Go ahead," I said. "Maybe they'd like to see the receipts on how long you've been draining me while treating me like furniture." That's when my mom stood up fully, her chair scraping the ground. Her voice turned sharp, desperate. "Allison, stop dragging this out," she said. "You made your point. Now fix it." She said it the way she always did when she expected me to fall back into line, like the order alone should trigger compliance. The thing was, they still thought this was a tantrum, a lesson, a threat that would end once they performed the correct apology. They didn't understand that I wasn't teaching them. I was leaving them. Not physically yet, but financially, emotionally, spiritually. I was stepping out of the role I never agreed to play. People started packing up early, not because they were ashamed, but because they were angry and confused and didn't know how to function without the invisible support system they'd mocked minutes earlier. My sister muttered threats about how we'd talk tomorrow. My uncle said I'd regret making enemies in my own family. My mom kept repeating that I was being selfish, as if I hadn't spent years sacrificing my own stability to prop up theirs. Eventually, they all left, not together, not united, just scattered, taking their panic with them. I stayed. I finished my drink. I ate the last bite of potato salad like it was a small act of closure. I watched the empty chairs and the abandoned plates and felt something strange settle in my chest. Not joy, not revenge, relief, sharp and clean. The next morning, they didn't call. They showed up. They didn't coordinate their arrival, which somehow made it worse. My mom rang the doorbell first, the polite chime she always used, when she wanted to pretend nothing was wrong. Less than 5 minutes later, my dad's truck pulled into the driveway, engine idling like he expected to be waved inside. I watched from the hallway window and felt that old reflex kick in, the one that told me to brace myself, to prepare to fix whatever they brought to my doorstep. I let it pass. When I opened the door, I didn't smile. My mom went straight to the point. "Your meds didn't go through," she said, already flustered, already assuming the solution would present itself if she sounded urgent enough. "The pharmacy says the card was declined." She stood there waiting, posture tilted forward, hands clasped, like I would turn around, pull out my phone, and restore the world. My dad stepped in beside her, voice firm. "We can't get gas. Your mother had to cancel an appointment. This isn't funny anymore." "It never was," I said. They both froze, like the script had been altered and no one told them. My dad frowned, genuinely confused. That was always his blind spot. If I wasn't paying for something, driving someone somewhere, or untangling an account, he didn't see me at all. "Just restore the cards," he said. "You made your point. Now stop dragging this out." Dragging it out, as if years of silent dependence were a misunderstanding, as if I was playing a game. My mom stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We need to settle this today," she said. "You don't want to make enemies in your own family." It wasn't even subtle. Fear wrapped in advice, control dressed up as concern. "I'm not settling anything," I said. "Not today, not any day. You should leave." Her eyes widened, not with anger, but with disbelief. My dad's tone hardened. "You've really let all this go to your head. You're being arrogant. You don't treat your parents like this." "I usually let my parents treat me however they want," I said. "That's what's changing." They didn't like that, but they also didn't know how to argue with it. They left quieter than they arrived, confusion replacing confidence, like they'd just realized the ground they stood on wasn't solid anymore. I knew it wouldn't be the end. They never stopped at the first no. That night, my sister made it public. A post about how heartbreaking it is when family becomes transactional, about how money turns people into monsters. Nothing direct, just enough to invite comments from relatives who loved vague morality. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the comments. The next morning, a fraud alert popped up from my bank. A $4,000 microloan had been taken out under a family account that used to be linked to mine. Technically not my responsibility anymore. Legally, not my problem. Emotionally, they thought it would break me, that I'd see the debt and rush in like always, horrified by the idea of late payments and collections. I didn't. I went out alone, got a burger, tipped well, took a walk without my phone, and let the silence settle. 2 days passed. No calls. Then my mom texted, no greeting, just, "Can we talk like adults and stop playing games?" I didn't reply, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing. Phase 2 arrived on schedule. Pity and guilt. An aunt texted that it was sad when families fall apart over things that don't really matter. No mention of what those things were. A cousin posted a quote about people forgetting everything you did the moment you stopped doing it. My sister posted a screenshot of a failed payment request and wrote about betrayal. They were trying to shame me back into place, to make me crack under the weight of public discomfort. Then my job got dragged into it. HR called me in, gentle but serious, asking if everything was okay at home. Someone had emailed anonymously, accusing me of misusing work resources and manipulating family finances. The claims were vague, clumsy, clearly written by someone who didn't understand how companies work. HR checked everything and found nothing. They reassured me, but the message landed anyway. They were willing to risk my livelihood to get control back. That night, I drove past my sister's place and sat across the street longer than I'm proud of, not to confront her, just to confirm what I already knew. The next morning, my dad called and left a voicemail about my mom not eating, about the family falling apart, about how she might need to go to the hospital. I didn't call back. I'd heard that script before. But later that evening, a pharmacy reminder pinged on my phone, one I'd forgotten to turn off. My mom hadn't picked up her meds in 6 days. I drove over. The porch light was on. No one answered the door. I let myself in with the spare key and found them upstairs watching a game show, a pizza box open between them, bottles of soda on the nightstand. My mom looked surprised to see me. My dad didn't look at me at all. I stood there, took it in, and left without a word. The next morning, I changed every password to every account that still had a thread connecting us. I revoked access to everything. I changed my phone number. 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door with a formal notice. My sister had reported me for financial harassment. It was nonsense legally, but it meant paperwork, time, and the stress of being dragged into something I hadn't started. I cooperated, sent records, timelines, receipts. It turned out she'd been using one of the cards I shut off to buy clothes and food delivery under my name for months. She withdrew the complaint. No apology, just silence. Then my parents showed up again, unannounced, holding a manila envelope like evidence. Inside were printed statements, lists of expenses, receipts stacked into a total. "We're not asking for money," my mom said quickly, "just understanding." Every word circled back to the same place, that I had something they didn't, that I owed them for having it. "I'm not your emergency exit anymore," I said. They left without yelling. A few days later, I saw a new alert tied to my name. Another loan. Same amount. Same tactic. They thought I'd break. I didn't. Weeks passed. The calls stopped. Then one morning, they returned with a receipt showing the loan paid in full. Cash. They'd sold the dining room furniture to do it. The table they'd guarded for decades. I'm not your safety net, I said. If you want any future at all, stay out of my life. They nodded and left. 4 months passed without a word. Then a letter arrived, a list of everything I'd ever covered, written out in bullet points, ending with a single line acknowledging the cost. No apology, just recognition. I didn't respond. The silence that followed was different, real. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something was about to snap. It felt like the end of a role I never agreed to play. The silence after that felt manufactured, like the kind that isn't peace so much as people regrouping. I knew my family too well to believe they were done. They'd lost the private leverage, so they moved to the public kind. Control doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It just changes shape. It started online. Nothing direct, nothing actionable, just enough to seed a story they hoped would grow legs on its own. My sister shared another post about betrayal and being used, careful not to name me, careful to let everyone else connect the dots. Aunts chimed in with prayer hands and sad face emojis. A cousin messaged asking if everything was okay, then followed it with a lecture about forgiveness before I could answer. It was all framed as concern, which is how pressure sneaks past boundaries. If they could make me look cold and unreasonable, they could justify everything they'd done to me for years. I didn't respond. I learned a long time ago that arguing with insinuations only feeds them. Instead, I documented. Screenshots, dates, messages. I kept a clean timeline, not because I planned to retaliate, but because people who try to control narratives often escalate when they realize guilt alone won't work. They escalated. A second anonymous message went to my workplace, this one subtler than the first. It questioned my professional judgment, implied I might be emotionally unstable, suggested my family issues were bleeding into my work. HR called me in again, this time with legal present, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. But facts are louder than insinuations. My performance reviews were solid. My accounts were clean. The allegations fell apart the moment they were examined. HR apologized for the disruption. I thanked them and went back to my desk, calm on the outside, simmering on the inside. That night, my sister tried a different angle. She texted me directly for the first time in weeks. No greeting, just a photo of a past due notice and a line that read, "This is what you've done." I stared at it, recognizing the tactic instantly, not asking for help, assigning blame. I typed nothing back. I muted the thread. The next morning, a distant relative called to tell me my parents were telling people I'd changed, that I'd become obsessed with money, that success had turned me cruel. I thanked her for the update and ended the call. It was almost impressive how consistent the story was. If I wasn't saving them anymore, I must be the villain. If I wasn't bleeding, I must be heartless. The pressure reached its peak when a process server showed up with a notice that wasn't a lawsuit but wanted to look like one. A complaint filed by my sister alleging financial coercion and emotional distress. It was thin, sloppy, designed to scare me into engaging. I called the county office, walked them through the documentation, and within days the complaint was withdrawn. No apology, just a quiet retreat. That told me something important. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. The last attempt was theatrical. My parents arrived unannounced again, this time dressed like they were attending a funeral, holding a folder thick with paper. They laid it out on my kitchen table and talked about totals, about sacrifices, about how much I'd helped and how little they'd realized it at the time. It was almost self-aware, but not enough to be real. They wanted absolution without accountability, understanding without change. I'm not your safety net, I said again, because repetition is sometimes the only way truth sticks. If you want any future contact at all, it will be on my terms. No posts, no third parties, no surprises. They left without arguing. That was new. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt earned. No messages, no posts, no anonymous emails. I didn't mistake it for remorse. I understood it as exhaustion. Control had failed, and failing is expensive. I kept living my life. I went to work. I saw friends. I slept through the night. The world didn't end because I stopped paying for it. It stabilized. That's when it hit me. Public shame had been their last lever. Without it, there was nothing left to pull. I thought the public pressure was the worst of it, but I underestimated how far they were willing to go when embarrassment didn't work. Control for them had always been tied to money, and when shame failed, they went back to the only language they truly understood. A notification from my bank was what tipped me off. It wasn't dramatic, just a standard alert, the kind you get so often you almost swipe it away without reading. A microloan had been opened under my name, $4,000, with an unfamiliar lender and an interest rate that made my stomach drop. I knew immediately what it was. They had found an old form, an old scan, some leftover thread from when our finances were still tangled, and they used it. Not because they needed the money urgently, but because they believed this would force me to respond. They assumed I would rush in like always, horrified at the idea of debt, terrified of collections, desperate to clean up the mess before it could stain me. They didn't understand that what they were doing now was different. This wasn't neglect or entitlement. This was deliberate. I printed the notice and set it on my counter, staring at it like it was a test. Every instinct I'd spent years building told me to fix it, to make it go away, to protect everyone involved, even if it cost me. That instinct had kept my family afloat for decades. It had also nearly destroyed me. So I didn't act. I let the calls from the lender go unanswered. I didn't contact my parents. I didn't warn them. I let the consequences unfold exactly as they were designed to. Days passed, then weeks. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, even for them. When they finally showed up again, they looked different, not angry, not indignant, tired. My mom held an envelope out to me with shaking hands. Inside was a receipt showing the loan paid in full, cash. I asked where it came from, and my dad admitted they'd sold the dining room table, the one piece of furniture they'd always treated like a family heirloom. The table where holidays had been staged, where appearances mattered more than feelings. That was when it finally clicked for them. Not because I yelled or demanded, but because for the first time, they had to sacrifice something real instead of asking me to do it for them. "I'm not your emergency exit anymore," I said quietly. "You don't get to hurt me to save yourselves." They didn't argue. They nodded, like people who finally realized the door they were knocking on was locked from the inside. After that, they disappeared. No texts, no posts, no surprise visits. A letter came weeks later, listing everything I'd ever paid for, every bill, every rescue, ending with a single line acknowledging the cost. It wasn't an apology, it was acceptance. I didn't respond. Stop! Part 6. I was never your safety net. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full in a way I hadn't known silence could be. My phone stopped buzzing with guilt and obligation. My weekends belonged to me. I slept better. I laughed more easily. The world didn't collapse because I stopped holding it up. It adjusted. That realization felt like the final release of a weight I'd been carrying since childhood. I heard things through the family grapevine, of course, that I'd changed, that I'd become cold, that money had ruined me. None of it bothered me the way it once would have. They were right about one thing. I had changed. I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. I stopped believing that being useful was the same as being valued. I stopped letting other people define my worth by what I could provide for them. One afternoon, months later, I ran into an aunt at the grocery store. She looked at me carefully and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled because it was true. I didn't need to explain. People who wanted to understand already did. People who didn't never would. The last time my sister reached out, it was brief. 2 words. "You win." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. This was never about winning. It was about survival. About choosing myself in a family that never had. Winning would have meant they learned something, and I wasn't sure they had. But I had, and that was enough. I no longer live in reaction to their needs or their chaos. I live in a space where my time is my own and my boundaries are respected because I enforce them. I don't feel anger when I think about them anymore. I feel distance, and distance, I've learned, can be an act of compassion when closeness only ever meant harm. I was never their safety net. I was their silence, their convenience, their golden ticket. And when I stepped out of that role, everything they built on it collapsed. Not because I destroyed it, but because it was never meant to stand without me. That's not revenge, that's clarity.